The great hall of Arcadia Prime gleamed like a crystal cathedral under the light of three suns. Massive beings from across the galaxy filled the space, their forms as different as the worlds they came from. The Dracani stood tall and powerful, legs, their scaled skin catching the light like polished armor. The Luminae floated in glowing pods of energy, their bodies shifting between solid and light. The Hiveth clicked and buzzed, their insect-like forms moving in perfect coordination. This was the Galactic Council, rulers of 1,000 worlds and masters of space for over 10,000 years. They met here every century to decide the fate of lesser species, to judge which races were ready to join their grand civilization and which should remain in ignorance. Admiral Koss of the Dracani Empire stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing through the hall. In his clawed hands, he held a data crystal containing the latest surveillance reports. His yellow eyes swept across the assembled representatives with barely hidden contempt. "We gather today to review the primitive species of the Outer Rim," Koss announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered dozens of worlds. "Most show little progress from our last review. However, one species requires our attention." The crystal projected a hologram into the center of the hall. A small blue and green world appeared, spinning slowly in the artificial light. White clouds swirled across its surface, and two small moons orbited nearby. "Earth," Koss said with disgust. "Home to the species called humans." The assembled representatives leaned forward with mild interest. Most had never heard of this world, or its inhabitants. It was located in what they considered the empty regions of space, far from any useful trade routes or strategic positions. "The humans have achieved basic spaceflight," Koss continued, waving his claw dismissively. "They have built crude stations around their world and sent primitive probes to nearby planets. But observe their technology." New images appeared showing human rockets belching fire and smoke as they struggled against gravity. Space stations that looked like children's toys compared to the magnificent cities that floated in council space. Robotic rovers crawling across barren worlds at speeds that would make a council scout laugh. "Pathetic," rumbled Gorth, the massive representative of the stone-like megalith civilization. "We mastered such technology before their star was born." Elder Bright of the Luminae spoke next, her thoughts translated into words by the hall's systems. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Their minds are chaotic and unfocused. They fight endless wars among themselves over resources that could be easily shared. They poison their own world while dreaming of reaching others." Hiveth representative Queen Buzz added her clicking voice to the discussion. "Our observers report they cannot even unite their own species. How could they possibly contribute to galactic civilization?" Koss nodded agreement. "Indeed. Their lifespan is laughably short. Most die before reaching 100 of their years. What wisdom could such brief lives possibly contain? What achievements could they accomplish in such fleeting existence?" He gestured again, and new images appeared, showing human conflicts. Cities in ruins, armies clashing across continents, weapons that could barely scratch the hull of a council shuttle. The representatives watched with the same interest they might show for insects fighting in a garden. "They show no signs of the unity required for galactic citizenship," Koss declared. "It's no evidence of the wisdom needed to handle advanced technology. Their cultures are fractured, their governments unstable, their science primitive. They remain trapped on their single world by their own limitations." The debate that followed was brief and one-sided. Representative after representative stood to voice their agreement. The humans were too young, too divided, too aggressive for contact with galactic civilization. They might advance in another 1,000 years, or they might destroy themselves. First, either way, they were not the Council's concern. "Motion to maintain isolation protocols around the human system," announced Koss. "Seconded," chimed Elder Bright. The vote was unanimous. Earth would remain quarantined from galactic knowledge for another century. The humans would continue their slow, painful climb toward the stars without help or guidance. Most representatives had already forgotten about the small blue world before the vote was even recorded. Far across the galaxy, on the very world they had just dismissed, Dr. Marcus Webb sat alone in his laboratory. The building was old and underfunded, located on the edge of a major city where the lights couldn't completely hide the stars. Marcus had spent 30 years studying space, searching for signs that Earth was not alone in the universe. Tonight was different. The readings on his screens showed patterns he had never seen before. Energy signatures from deep space that pulsed with too much regularity to be natural. Radio waves that carried the faint echo of structure as if they had once carried information across the vast distances between stars. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his instruments with shaking hands. He was 65 years old, considered past his prime by younger scientists who focused on more practical matters. His requests for funding to build better detection equipment were always denied. The review boards told him to focus on satellite, communications, or weather monitoring, things that could make money for the corporations that funded research. But Marcus knew what he was seeing. The universe was full of intelligence, full of civilizations that had mastered the stars while humanity still struggled to reach their own moon. He printed out the data readings and filed them carefully in folders that no one else ever looked. At somewhere out there, vast empires rose and fell among the stars, and Earth remained ignorant of it all. The next morning, Marcus submitted another funding request for an expanded deep space monitoring array. He wrote careful explanations of what such a system might detect, how it could benefit human knowledge, why it was important to look beyond their small corner of space. He had submitted dozens of similar requests over the years. 2 weeks later, the rejection letter arrived. The review board thanked him for his dedication but explained that current priorities focused on practical applications of space technology. There was no funding available for projects based on speculation about extraterrestrial life. They suggested he consider retirement and allow younger researchers to take over his work. Marcus crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. Then he turned back to his instruments, adjusting them to scan deeper into space. If no one would fund his search for the truth, he would continue it alone. Somewhere among the stars, advanced civilizations went about their business, never knowing that a stubborn old man on a small blue world was trying desperately to prove they existed. The galaxy had judged humanity and found them wanting, but the galaxy had never met someone like Marcus Webb, who refused to accept that Earth was alone simply because those in power said it was so. 50 years passed like the blink of an eye to the ancient civilizations of the Galactic Council. On Arcadia Prime, the crystal halls remained unchanged, hosting the same debates between the same eternal species. The Dracani still flexed there. Military might, conquering worlds with fleets that had dominated space for millennia. The Luminae continued their mysterious projects, manipulating younger species from the shadows. The Hyveth expanded their colonies, consuming entire ecosystems to feed their endless appetite for growth. None of them remembered the small blue world called Earth. It remained filed away in their archives, marked for review in another 50 years. Why would they think of such an insignificant speck when they had trade wars to fight and territories to claim? But Earth had not stayed still. While the council species argued over ancient grievances, humanity had undergone a revolution that would have stunned them into silence. It began with Dr. Lisa Park, working in a basement laboratory beneath the University of New Tokyo. She had read Dr. Marcus Webb's old papers about energy signatures from space and wondered about the power sources that could generate such readings. While the council races had long ago perfected fusion technology, they did it the hard way. With massive reactors that required entire cities to maintain, Lisa found a different path. By studying the quantum mechanics of plasma containment at the smallest scale, she discovered how to create fusion reactions in devices no larger than a briefcase. The breakthrough came when she realized that the plasma didn't need to be contained by magnetic fields if it could be convinced to contain itself through quantum entanglement effects. The first successful test lit up the entire university district. Clean energy, unlimited and cheap, flowing from a device that weighed less than 50 pounds. Within 10 years, every home and building on Earth was powered by Lisa's fusion cells. Poverty ended overnight. The climate crisis that had threatened human civilization became a memory as fossil fuels were abandoned completely, with unlimited clean energy. Humanity reached for the stars with hands no longer tied by scarcity. Dr. Ray Foster led the team that designed humanity's first, faster-than-light drive. Unlike the Council races who used brute force methods that bent space around their ships, human scientists found a more elegant solution. They discovered how to slip between the quantum foam that made up the fabric of space itself. Human ships didn't travel faster than light so much as they stepped outside normal space entirely, moving through dimensions where distance had different meanings. The drives were nearly silent and left almost no trace for sensors to detect. The U's Pioneer launched on a Tuesday morning with no fanfare or publicity. Captain Foster and his crew of 50 scientists and explorers simply vanished from Earth's solar system and reappeared near Proxima Centauri 3 days later. The journey that would have taken Council ships weeks was completed in hours. What they found changed everything. The nearest star systems were full of life, but not the kind that appeared in Council records. These were worlds that had been strip-mined and abandoned. Civilizations that had been conquered and enslaved. Entire species reduced to servitude for the benefit of their galactic masters. The more human ships explored, the more the pattern became clear. The Galactic Council was not a benevolent organization bringing peace to the galaxy. They were predators who had systematized conquest, turning the domination of weaker species into a form of art. Dr. Emma Cole documented it all from her position as the expedition's xenobiologist. She recorded the empty cities on worlds that had once housed billions, now reduced to mining colonies worked by a handful of survivors. She cataloged species that had been genetically modified to be better slaves. Their intelligence reduced and their lifespans shortened to make them more manageable. "They're not civilized," she told Captain Foster as they watched a Draconi, a troll ship, destroy an automated research station simply because it had been built by a species without permission to explore space. "They're just very good at organizing." Their cruelty, humanity began to build in the darkness between stars. They chose systems the Council had marked as worthless. Places where harsh radiation or unstable gravity made colonization seem impossible. But human technology, built around quantum manipulation rather than brute force, thrived in conditions that would destroy Council settlements. The colony of New Geneva was established in a system plagued by electromagnetic storms that made conventional shields useless. Human colonists used quantum field generators to turn the storms into a source of power, building cities that were invisible to Council sensors but blazed with clean energy. Similar colonies sprouted across human space. New Amsterdam floated in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant, harvesting exotic matter from the storm bands. New Sydney was built inside an asteroid field so dense that Council ships couldn't navigate it safely. But human vessels slipped through the rocks like ghosts. Each colony became a refuge for survivors of Council expansion. The human diplomatic corps, led by Ambassador Tom Rivers, made contact with resistance movements across the galaxy. They offered something the Council never had: genuine partnership, instead of conquest. The Atari had been enslaved by the Luminae for over 3,000 years, bred to be living computers who processed information for their masters. Human agents smuggled quantum computers to Atari rebels, giving them the tools to break their mental chains and think freely for the first time in generations. The Korath had seen their ocean worlds drained by Hyveth colony ships, their beautiful coral cities left to die in the sun. Human engineers helped them build underwater cities in hidden seas, protected by cloaking technology that made them invisible to orbital surveys. Dozens of species that the Council considered extinct were quietly relocated to human colonies. Given new homes and the technology to defend themselves, each refugee became a teacher, sharing knowledge of Council weaknesses and helping humanity understand their enemies. Captain Foster stood on the bridge of his ship, now upgraded with technology that incorporated innovations from 100 different species. The star maps showed human space growing quietly, not through conquest, but through invitation. Every species that joined them made humanity stronger, adding their unique perspectives and abilities to the growing alliance. "The Council thinks civilization means domination," Foster told his crew as they prepared for another scouting mission. "But we're proving that cooperation is stronger than conquest." Meanwhile, on the Council worlds, life continued as it had. For millennia, the Draconi admirals planned new invasions. The Luminae elders manipulated primitive species for their amusement, and the Hyveth queens calculated the optimal rate of galactic consumption. None of them noticed the energy signatures that Dr. Marcus Webb had detected decades earlier, growing stronger and more complex. If they had looked more carefully at their long-range sensors, they might have seen the signs: ships moving through space using drives they didn't recognize, colonies appearing in systems they had written off as uninhabitable, communications networks operating on frequencies that shouldn't have been able to carry signals across interstellar distances. But the Council had grown comfortable in their dominance. They had ruled the galaxy for so long that they couldn't imagine anyone challenging their authority. How could they? Every species they had encountered had eventually submitted to Council's superiority or been destroyed trying to resist. They had forgotten about the small blue world, where a stubborn old scientist had spent his life searching for signs of galactic civilization. They had no idea that his work had inspired a generation of humans who refused to accept that might made right. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity had time to prepare. Commander Thresh of the Thrakkery Dominion was having a bad day. His patrol fleet had been searching the Outer Rim for 3 weeks, looking for pirates who had been hitting Council supply convoys. The Thrakari took their role as the Council's enforcers seriously, and these attacks were making them look weak. The 4 heavy cruisers under his command represented the finest military technology the Council possessed. Each ship was over 1 kilometer long, armed with plasma cannons that could crack a planet's crust and shields that had never been breached in battle. The Thrakari had been the Council's military arm for 5,000 years, and their ships were feared across the galaxy. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Vorth from the sensor station, "we're detecting artificial structures in the Kepler 442 system." Thresh's scaled brow furrowed. According to his star charts, Kepler 442 was classified as uninhabitable. The system's main world was constantly battered by electromagnetic storms from its unstable star, making it impossible for any known technology to establish a permanent presence there. "Show me," Thresh ordered. The main display filled with an image of the planet's surface. Through the crackling energy storms, they could see the unmistakable signs of civilization. Buildings that seemed to glow with their own light, transportation networks that ran in perfect geometric patterns, and what looked like defensive installations built into the mountain ranges. "Could be the pirates we're hunting," suggested Navigator. "Kenth, they might have found a way to shield themselves from the storms." Thresh nodded slowly. It was the only explanation that made sense. No species on the Council's approved list had the technology to colonize such a hostile world, and no primitive species could have developed it on their own. These had to be criminals using stolen technology. "Signal the fleet," Thresh commanded. "We move to attack formation, standard procedure for dealing with unauthorized settlements." The Thrakkery had centuries of experience with this kind of operation. Primitive species occasionally managed to establish colonies in systems marked as Council territory, usually using crude technology that barely functioned. The solution was always the same: destroy the settlement completely and leave no survivors. To spread word of their defiance, as the 4 cruisers approached the planet, Thresh studied the readings more carefully. The colony was larger than expected, with what appeared to be several million inhabitants. The structures were also more sophisticated than typical pirate bases, showing signs of advanced engineering and careful planning. "Sir," Vorth called out. "Again, we're receiving a transmission from the surface." "Put it through," Thresh replied, curious to hear what these criminals had to say for themselves. The voice that came through the communicator was calm and professional, speaking imperfect. "Council standard. Thrakkery vessels. This is New Geneva Control. You're approaching a peaceful human colony. Please state your intentions." Thresh laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Human. There are no humans in this sector. Check your files, Vorth." The lieutenant's claws clicked across his console as he accessed the Council databases. "Humans are listed as a primitive species confined to their home system, sir. They have no authorization for interstellar travel or colonization." "Exactly," Thresh said, settling back in his command chair. "Whoever you are, you're trespassing. In Council space, you have 1 minute to begin evacuation procedures before we open fire. There was a pause before the voice responded. Commander, we have no hostile intentions toward the Council or any of its member species. This colony was established on a world the Council classified as uninhabitable. We're not interfering with any Council operations. You're interfering with Council law by existing, Thresh replied coldly. Primitive species do not establish colonies without permission. You have 30 seconds. Servorth interrupted. I'm reading massive power buildups across the planet's surface. The energy signatures are ... unusual. Thresh glanced at the readings and frowned. The power levels were far higher than anything he'd expect from a pirate base. But the frequency patterns didn't match any known Council technology. Weapons? Unknown, sir? I've never seen anything like this. It doesn't matter, Thresh decided. Begin the attack. Target their power generation facilities first. The Thrakari fleet opened fire with the precision of long practice. Plasma beams that could vaporize mountains lanced down toward the planet's surface, aimed at the structures that seemed to be generating the most energy. The assault should have ended the battle before it began. Instead, something impossible happened. The plasma beams struck invisible barriers around the colony and simply stopped. Not deflected or absorbed, but frozen in place, like insects trapped in amber. The energy hung in the air for a moment, crackling with frustrated power, before dissipating. Harmlessly. What in the name of the void was that? Thresh demanded. Before anyone could answer, the mountains around New Geneva began to move. What had appeared to be natural rock formations unfolded like mechanical flowers, revealing structures that gleamed with the same strange energy that had stopped the plasma beams. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, clearly artificial. But unlike anything in Council military databases, Sir, I'm reading weapon locks, Forth reported, his voice tight with fear. Multiple targets, unknown weapon types. The first human weapon fired before Thresh could give orders to retreat. It wasn't like the plasma cannons or particle beams that dominated Council warfare. Instead, it was a focused beam of pure energy that seemed to slice through space itself. The beam struck the lead cruiser's shields and passed through them as if they weren't there. The massive warship, pride of the Thrakari fleet and veteran of 100 battles, was cut cleanly in half. The two sections tumbled away from each other, atmosphere and debris streaming from the wounds. There was no explosion, no dramatic fireball. The ship simply ceased to exist as a functional unit. Evasive maneuvers. Thresh screamed, but it was too late. More beams lanced up from the planet's surface, each one finding its target with impossible precision. The human weapons seemed to predict where the Thrakari ships would be, compensating for their movement before they even began it. The second cruiser managed to fire a full salvo before it died. But the plasma bolts were caught and neutralized by the same barriers that had protected the colony. The third ship activated its emergency jump drive, trying to escape to hyperspace, but the human weapons followed it even there. It emerged from its jump as scattered atoms. Commander Thresh's flagship was the last to fall. As the mountain-based weapons swiveled toward him, he managed to send a final transmission to Council space. Unknown human weapons? Impossible technology. The outer rim is compromiso. The beam that killed him was almost gentle compared to the others. His ship simply faded away, as if it had been an illusion that someone had chosen to stop believing. On the surface of New Geneva, Dr. Emma Cole watched the engagement from the colony's command center. The quantum targeting systems had performed flawlessly, predicting every move the Thrakari ships would make and countering them with surgical precision. Not a single shot had been wasted. Well, she said to Governor Harris, who had been elected, to lead the colony, I suppose that's the end of our peaceful isolation. Harris nodded grimly. Send a message to Earth and all the other colonies. Tell them the Council knows about us now. We need to prepare for what comes next, across the galaxy. The news of the Thrakari patrol's disappearance spread through Council space like wildfire. 4 heavy cruisers destroyed by a species that wasn't supposed to have space travel. Weapons that could cut through Thrakari shields like they were made of paper. colony on a world that should have been uninhabitable. Admiral Koss, now old, but still commanding the Draconi fleet, called an emergency session of the Council. The crystal halls of Arcadia Prime filled with representatives demanding answers. How had the humans advanced so quickly? Where had they gotten such technology? And most importantly, what did they want? Elder Bright of the Luminae floated in her energy pod, her thoughts dark with worry. "This is exactly why we monitor primitive species," she declared. "Left unchecked, they develop in unpredictable ways." "They must have stolen this technology," insisted Queen Buzz of the Hiveth. "No species advances from chemical rockets to energy weapons in 50 years. It's impossible." But Admiral Koss studied the tactical reports with growing unease. The weapons that had destroyed the Thrakari fleet were not copies of Council technology. They were something entirely new, based on principles that Council science had never explored. The humans hadn't stolen their way to the stars. They had found their own path, and it was leading them to places the Council had never imagined. "Motion to declare the human species a threat to galactic stability," Koss announced. "Call for immediate military action to contain this development before it spreads." The vote was unanimous, but for the first time in Council history, there was fear in the voices that cast it. The humans were no longer the primitive species they had dismissed 50 years ago. They were something new, something dangerous, and something that might not be as easy to defeat as the Council assumed. War was coming to the galaxy, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Council was not certain they would win it. The Council's response was everything Admiral Koss had hoped it would be. Then 3 months of the Thrakari Patrol's destruction. The largest military fleet in galactic history assembled at the edge of human space. 3,000 ships from 6 different Council races formed a wall of metal and energy that stretched across multiple star systems. The Draconi contributed their heaviest battleships, each one a kilometer of armored death designed to crack planets. The Luminae brought their mysterious crystal vessels that could phase in and out of normal space. The Hiveth swarmed forward with countless smaller ships that moved like schools of mechanical fish. Even species that rarely involved themselves in Council politics sent their fleets to deal with this unprecedented threat. Admiral Koss stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Draconi dreadnought Eternal Conquest, and surveyed his armada with satisfaction. No force in galactic history had ever assembled such overwhelming power. The humans might have superior weapons, but they were still a single species confined to a handful of colonies. Numbers would tell in the end. "Send the final demand for surrender," Koss ordered his communications officer. "Tell them they have 1 hour to submit to Council authority or face total annihilation." The message went out across human space, broadcast to every known human colony, and picked up by their monitoring stations. The response came back within minutes, not from New Geneva or any of the established colonies, but from a location that made Koss frown at his tactical displays. "This is Admiral Ray Foster of the Human Defense Fleet," came the calm voice. "I'm speaking to you from the bridge of the UES Defiance. Your demand for surrender is rejected. If you want a war, Admiral Koss, then you'll have one." Koss is yellow. Eyes narrowed. According to his sensors, the transmission was coming from empty space, somewhere near the center of the Council fleet. That was impossible. Nothing could approach his armada undetected, and certainly not close enough to broadcast on short-range frequencies. "Scan for the source of that transmission," he ordered. Before his sensor operators could respond, space around the Council fleet began to change. Ships appeared out of nowhere, not emerging from hyperspace jumps, but simply materializing as if they had been invisible moments before. Human vessels, sleek and deadly, surrounded the massive Council armada like wolves circling a herd of cattle. "Many?" Koss demanded. "Unknown, sir," his sensor officer replied, his voice shaking. "Our sensors can't get accurate readings. They're using some kind of stealth technology we've never encountered." The truth was even more disturbing than Koss realized. The human ships weren't just using stealth technology. They were phasing in and out of normal space, using their quantum drives, appearing long enough to be seen before vanishing back into dimensions the Council couldn't detect. It made accurate counts impossible and targeting systems useless. Admiral. Foster coordinated the battle from his flagship, but he wasn't relying on traditional command structures. The human fleet was connected by quantum communication networks that allowed instantaneous coordination across light years. Every ship knew exactly where every other ship was and what it was doing, creating a level of tactical awareness that no Council force had ever achieved. "Begin Phase 1, Foster ordered. The human attack began with surgical precision. Instead of engaging the entire Council fleet at once, the human ships targeted specific vessels with overwhelming force. A dozen human destroyers would materialize around a single Council cruiser, pour devastating fire into it from every angle, and vanish before the enemy could respond. The Council ships found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't predict or counter. Their weapons, designed for conventional warfare between visible opponents, fired at empty space while human ships struck from impossible angles. Their shields, configured to stop known energy types, were useless against human weapons that operated on entirely different principles. Elder. Bright tried to coordinate a Lumine response from her crystal ship, but her telepathic commands couldn't reach targets she couldn't sense. The human ships existed in quantum states that made them nearly invisible to psychic detection, sliding between reality and possibility like thoughts made manifest. "They're not fighting like any species we've encountered," she reported to the other Council commanders. "Their tactics are completely alien to our understanding of warfare." Queen Buzz of the Hiveth attempted to overwhelm human positions with swarm attacks, sending hundreds of her smaller ships against single human vessels. But the human point defense systems were controlled by artificial intelligences that could track and target thousands of objects simultaneously. Hiveth fighters that had never been stopped by any Council weapon were swatted from space like insects. The battle turned from engagement to massacre within the first hour. Council ships that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they could barely see and couldn't effectively fight. The humans weren't just winning. They were demonstrating that everything the Council thought they knew about warfare was obsolete. But the real shock came when the human allies revealed themselves. Ships of dozens of species that the Council had written off as conquered or extinct suddenly appeared throughout the battlefield. The Atari, freed from Lumine mental control, used their enhanced intelligence to hack Council command systems. The Korath, thought to be extinct, emerged from hidden ocean worlds with vessels designed for deep space combat. Impossible Koss breathed as he watched his tactical display fill with enemy contacts. "We destroyed these species. We conquered their worlds. You conquered some of our worlds," came a transmission from a Utari commander. "But you never conquered us. The humans gave us hope and the tools to fight back. Now you'll learn what that means." The Council fleet began to collapse as species after species. It's revealed that reports of their destruction had been greatly exaggerated. The humans had spent 50 years secretly evacuating survivors, establishing hidden colonies, and building a network of allies that spanned the galaxy. What the Council faced wasn't just human technology, but the combined anger of every species they had oppressed. Admiral Foster watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The quantum tactical systems allowed him to see the entire engagement as if it were happening in slow motion, every movement predicted and countered before it began. The Council forces were fighting bravely, but they were using strategies and weapons that were centuries out of date. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "the Council fleet is beginning to retreat." Foster nodded. The remaining Council ships were trying to escape to hyperspace, but human vessels were already waiting for them at their jump points. The quantum drives that made human ships so elusive also allowed them to predict where conventional hyperspace jumps would emerge. "Let them go," Foster ordered. "We've made our point." Of the 3,000 ships that had approached human space with such confidence, less than 200 limped away. The greatest military force in galactic history had been broken in a single engagement. It's not through superior numbers, but through technology and tactics the Council couldn't comprehend. News of the disaster spread across Council space faster than their retreating ships. Species that had served the Council for millennia began to question whether their masters were as invincible as they had claimed. Worlds that had submitted to Council authority centuries ago started asking whether submission was really necessary. On the Corvin trade worlds, merchants who had paid tribute to Council species for generations suddenly found human ships, offering better prices and fairer deals. The carefully maintained economic systems that kept the Council wealthy began to collapse as their monopolies were broken by competition they couldn't eliminate. The Draconi Empire found itself facing rebellions on a dozen colony worlds as subject. Species decided they would rather take their chances with the humans than continue under Draconi rule. The Luminae retreated to their core systems as their psychic networks, disrupted by human technology they couldn't understand or counter. Even the unstoppable Hyveth expansion ground to a halt as human. Bioweapons targeted their queens specifically, designed to harm only the Hyveth leadership while leaving other species untouched. Entire colonies collapsed overnight as their command structures were eliminated with surgical precision. Admiral Koss sat in his damaged flagship and stared at the reports flooding in from across Council space. Everywhere he looked, the careful order that had maintained galactic peace for 10,000 years was falling apart. Species were abandoning their allegiances, colonies were declaring independence, and trade routes were being controlled by human vessels that appeared and disappeared, like ghosts. How? He asked the empty bridge. How did they do this? The answer was simple, though the Council would never understand it. While they had spent millennia perfecting the art of conquest, humanity had discovered something far more powerful. They had learned to give other species hope, to offer partnership instead of domination, and to fight not just for their own survival but for the freedom of everyone who had been crushed beneath the Council's rule. The galaxy was burning. For the first time in centuries, the fires carried the promise of something better rising from the ashes. 2 years after the great battle that shattered the Council fleet, representatives from 300 different species gathered on Earth for the most important meeting in galactic history. The crystal halls of Arcadia Prime stood empty, there. Once proud chambers cracked and abandoned. The age of the Galactic Council was over, and something new was about to take its place. Unity Hall rose from the shores of the Pacific Ocean like a dream made real. The building itself was a work of art that combined architectural elements from dozens of different worlds. Draconi stonework supported Luminae crystal windows, while Yattery mathematical patterns decorated walls that used Korath coral growing techniques. Every species that had joined the Alliance had contributed something to the structure, creating a monument to cooperation rather than conquest. Admiral Ray Foster, now serving as Secretary General of the Galactic Alliance, stood before the assembled delegates and felt the weight of history on his shoulders. The hall was filled with beings who had never imagined they would sit as equals in a galactic government. Former slaves sat next to their liberators, while species that had been enemies for centuries worked together to build a better future. Friends, Foster began, his words automatically translated into hundreds of languages and thought patterns. We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, but as partners in a grand experiment. For too long, this galaxy has been ruled by fear and domination. Today, we choose a different path. In the front row, Dr. Marcus Webb sat in his mobility chair, kept alive by medical technology that had advanced far beyond anything available. During his lonely vigil for signs of alien life, the old scientist's eyes were bright with wonder as he watched species from across the galaxy work together to solve problems that had seemed impossible just years before. The galactic accords that the delegates signed that day were unlike any treaty in galactic history. Instead of defining territories and tribute obligations, established principles of cooperation, mutual aid, and shared governance. Every species, no matter how small or technologically primitive, would have a voice in decisions that affected them. The transformation hadn't been easy. The collapse of the Council had left power vacuums across the galaxy, and not every species had been willing to embrace the new order peacefully. Some Draconi commanders had tried to maintain their empire through force, only to discover that their former subjects now had access to human weapons and training. A few Luminae enclaves had attempted to continue their manipulation of primitive species, but found their psychic networks disrupted by human quantum technology. The Hiveth had perhaps struggled the most with the new reality. Their entire society was built around expansion and consumption, concepts that didn't fit well with the Alliance's emphasis on sustainability and cooperation. But even they had found a place in the new order, with several queens agreeing to limit their growth in exchange for help. Developing technologies that could meet their needs without destroying entire ecosystems, General Vaz, of what was now called the Draconi Republic, stood to address the assembly. Once a subordinate of Admiral Koss, he had led the faction that chose cooperation over continued resistance. "My people have a saying," he rumbled in his deep voice. "The strongest fortress is the one that welcomes allies rather than fears enemies. We have learned this truth from humanity's example." The changes went far beyond politics. Human technology, freely shared with Alliance members, was transforming entire civilizations. Worlds that had been strip-mined by Council exploitation were being restored using quantum environmental processors. Species that had been genetically modified for slavery were being helped to recover their original forms, or to choose new ones that better suited their desires. Dr. Emma Cole, now serving as the Alliance's chief science officer, had established research stations throughout the galaxy where scientists from hundreds of species worked together on projects that would benefit everyone. The quantum computers that had freed the Yteri were being used to solve mathematical problems that had puzzled galactic civilization for millennia. Korath biotechnology was helping to heal worlds poisoned by industrial pollution. The Council always told us that resources were scarce, reported Dr. Park, as fusion technology had started humanity's technological revolution. But when you stop hoarding and start sharing, you discover that the galaxy is abundant enough for everyone. Economic transformation was equally dramatic. The old system of tribute and exploitation had been replaced by genuine trade networks, where every species could offer their unique contributions. The megalith, with their expertise in working with stone and metal, found new markets for their craftsmanship. The Atari, freed from mental slavery, came the galaxy's finest information processors and analysts. Not everyone had joined the Alliance willingly. Several species had chosen isolation over integration, retreating to their core worlds and refusing contact with the new galactic government. The Alliance respected these choices, maintaining distant but peaceful relations with those who preferred independence. Elder Bright of the Luminae was one of the few Council leaders who had survived the transition. Her crystal ship floated at the edge of the solar system, neither joining the Alliance nor actively opposing it. Occasionally, she would send messages expressing her species' willingness to coexist peacefully, but the Luminae remained largely withdrawn from galactic affairs. Change is difficult for those who have lived for millennia, Foster acknowledged during one of the Alliance's governing council meetings. But we must be patient. The door remains open for any species that chooses to join us. The most significant change was in how the galaxy approached exploration and first contact. The old council system of classifying species as primitive or advanced had been completely abandoned. Instead, the Alliance established protocols for peaceful contact that respected the autonomy of newly discovered civilizations. When Alliance scouts found a species, still in the early stages of space exploration, they observed from a distance and offered subtle assistance only if requested. No species was forced to join the Alliance or given technology they weren't ready for. The choice to make contact was always left to the developing civilization. Captain Torres, who commanded one of the Alliance's exploration fleets, described the new approach during a briefing to the governing council. "We've made contact with 17 new species in the past year," she reported. 5 have chosen to join the Alliance, 8 prefer limited contact, and 4 have asked us to leave them alone for now. We've respected all of their decisions. Military transformation was perhaps the most profound change of all. The Alliance maintained defense forces, but their purpose was protection rather than conquest. Human quantum technology had made traditional warfare obsolete in any case. The weapons that could phase through shields and predict enemy movements were too dangerous to use except in the most extreme circumstances. Instead, the Alliance focused on peacekeeping and humanitarian missions when natural disasters struck. Member worlds' Alliance ships arrived within hours to provide aid. When conflicts arose between species, Alliance mediators helped find solutions that worked for everyone involved. Admiral Foster often thought about the long journey that had brought them to this point. Humanity's rise from a dismissed primitive species to the leaders of a galactic alliance had taken less than a century. But it felt like the work of ages. The key hadn't been superior technology or military might, though those had certainly helped. The real difference had been humanity's willingness to see potential in others that more established civilizations had overlooked. We didn't set out to conquer the galaxy, Foster reflected during a private moment with Dr. Webb. Just wanted to prove we weren't alone. But in proving that, we discovered something more important than we ever imagined. The old scientist smiled, his eyes fixed on the stars visible through Unity Hall's crystal windows. We discovered that being alone was never the real problem, he said quietly. The problem was that those who weren't alone had forgotten how to share the galaxy with others. As the signing ceremony concluded and delegates began to disperse back to their home worlds, the future stretched ahead filled with possibilities that the old council could never have imagined. New worlds were being discovered and peacefully contacted. Ancient conflicts were being resolved through cooperation rather than conquest. Technologies were being developed that could restore damaged ecosystems and extend life across species barriers. The galaxy was no longer at war. But more importantly, it was no longer ruled by fear. Species that had been enemies for centuries were learning to work together. Civilizations that had been written off as primitive were contributing innovations that amazed their supposedly superior neighbors. Humanity had risen from obscurity to leadership, not through dominance, but through partnership. They had ignored the Council's dismissal and built something better than anyone had thought possible. The small blue world that had been deemed unworthy of contact had become the center of a new kind of galactic civilization. One based on hope rather than fear, cooperation rather than conquest. The stars that had once seemed cold and distant now blazed with the warmth of countless worlds working together toward a common future. The galaxy that had ignored humanity's rise was learning that sometimes the greatest strength comes from lifting others up rather than holding them down. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. The revolutionary idea that everyone deserved a chance to reach for the stars.